Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Do you think you influence other people? You might be surprised, says our guest, Dr. Vanessa Bohns. Dr. Bohns, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, you've written a book, You Have More Influence Than You Think. I think that's a great title because it certainly attracted me. What made you write this book?
Well, I noticed that there were so many books out there on how to gain influence. If you kind of look at the landscape of books about this topic, there's just tons of tips and tricks out there, and they tend to be hugely popular. And kind of looking at that, it would make you think that people are hopelessly lacking in influence and that they need a lot of advice to get it and to be able to impact other people. But as a social psychologist who studies social influence, I've actually seen for years how much we do impact other people. And so this really didn't jive with sort of the way I see the world. I see us as being hugely influential. And so this book is really trying to present that side of the story. Why is it that in so many cases we think that we don't have influence when in fact we have a great deal of influence? And so the book is really an examination of the psychological biases that cause us to miss the impact we have on other people.
And how come the idol we start out with, and I think it's in the first chapter of your book, is that famous person, Mr. Magoo?
That's right. Mr. Magoo. I love this example. And, he is the famously nearsighted cartoon character from back in the 50s who still kind of resonates today. And I start out with Mr. Magoo because he is a great example of someone who walks through the world impacting people in really big ways, right? In these really kind of comically ridiculous ways, and being completely oblivious to the impact that he has. And so I love this as an example to start to think about our influence, that we also walk through the world and impact people in ways that we may not see, not as dramatically as Mr. Magoo, but in many ways, people kind of think about the things they've seen us do. They think about the things we've said long after we've left the scene, and we have no idea.
And you've definitely got me thinking about things as I'm preparing the show and going through your book, saying, will someone see me doing this? How will they evaluate that? And will they be paying attention? So it certainly worked on me. And I think for our audience, they're going to have a lot of fun with this and also see that they can use it in their personal lives and their business lives. And we're going to ask you more about that. You started out talking about an experiment you did where the recipients of a compliment actually appreciated it kind of more than people thought. Can you tell us about that experiment?
That's right. So a lot of my experiments, because I'm an experimental social psychologist, start out by asking people to make a guess about how they are likely to impact another person. And then we send people out and we actually have them do something and then report back to us how they actually did impact that other person. So in this case, we had participants come into the lab and we said, you're going to give a compliment to a random stranger. You're going to leave the lab, find the fifth person on your right of the same gender, and just give them a random compliment. And for our first study, we said, just tell them you like their shirt. We just came up with something very superficial and easy that they could say. And we asked them, how good do you think that compliment will make that other person feel? We also asked them, how annoyed do you think that person will be that you interrupted them to give them this compliment? And then we had them give that person a survey that they weren't able to see the answers to, but they brought back to us, the researchers, so that we could see the answers to. And that survey asked that person how good they actually felt and how annoyed they actually felt being stopped by this person. And what we found was that people assumed that another person who they stopped to give a compliment to would actually be kind of annoyed that they had been interrupted and stopped by this stranger. And they didn't think the compliment would really make them feel that good. But in fact, the other person reported that the compliment made them feel much better than our participants expected, and that they weren't at all annoyed to be stopped by this person receive a compliment.
So a win-win for everybody.
Absolutely. That's right. And then our participants actually felt better after the fact, too, because compliments actually make everybody feel better in the end.
Personally, I always thought that. And if I had the chance just to say something nice to anyone, and usually more, I would say, of a downtrodden person, someone with a menial job or something, gee, that your hair looks nice, or that's a nice bow or ribbon or something, or suit that you're wearing. But I didn't know, as you've experimented with it, that it meant that much to them. So I'm glad it had some effect, and hopefully it will continue to. You mentioned that, and you use the word, I think, invisible in the book, that the impact of our presence on others is, we underestimate it because we feel invisible. Is that people who have a low self-image, or is that everybody?
This is a really interesting aspect of a lot of the research I talk about in the book, is that it really does impact everybody. So, we think, oh, it's just introverts or shy people. And we find that they do underestimate their influence a little bit more than other people in some cases. But even extroverts, even people in powerful positions who you think would be acutely aware of the influence that they have, across the board, it seems that to some extent, people underestimate the influence that they have over others. And that includes this idea of invisibility that you mentioned, that we tend to think that people really aren't noticing us, they aren't paying attention to us, when in fact more people are paying attention to the things that we're doing and to our presence in a room or in a particular situation than we tend to think.
Now, there's a term, I always like industry-wide terms or something that kind of takes us behind the screen, and I think you use the term invisibility cloak illusion. And that makes me sound very smart when I say it. So can you tell us, what does that mean?
This is a term that Erica Boothby, the researcher who did this work, who's a postdoc at Wharton, came up with. And she uses this term, invisibility cloak illusion, to describe this idea of walking through the world as if you're invisible. So it kind of conjures up this image of having this cape, this invisibility cloak around you that makes you feel like, oh, no one's really looking at me or noticing me, when in fact they are.
And I guess we all, it's prevalent, I guess the word would be, that, as you said, you've observed this, and people are watching us, so we better behave and we better listen to what you have to say today. Now, if others aren't paying attention to what you think they are, how does that work? I think you mentioned that a lot of us are insecure about things. Maybe it's our weight or our height or the color of our hair or the fact we have no hair. How does that aspect of the experiment work?
So this is a very interesting point, is that often once people hear that, oh, people are paying attention to me more than I thought they were, people are impacted by me more than I thought, they often get very self-conscious. And they think that what we're talking about in these studies is that people are noticing all these embarrassing things about us, right? The things that we're most acutely self-conscious about. But in fact, there's another phenomenon called the spotlight effect. And that suggests that people are paying less attention to the things that we're worried about than paying attention to. So they pay less attention to, a spot on our shirt or a time we misspoke than we tend to think. But they're paying more attention to us in situations that we aren't acutely self-conscious in. So, for example, if we're just kind of going about our daily routine, if we're just engaging in a regular behavior in an ordinary situation where we're not feeling particularly self-conscious, that's when people are really noticing us. And it's not those times that we're worried everyone's paying attention to us.
Do you feel this has helped? I mean, you obviously know your students, probably not on a continual friendship basis, but they come into your class. You get to talk to a few of them in every class. Does this help them knowing these tips that you're giving out, that maybe if they were a little insecure? Because I remember once being in a doctor's office and two nice-looking, I would say, early college girls, each were going back and forth telling the other one, oh, I'm too tall. The other one said, well, I'm too short. And each one is complimenting the other one on the opposite of what they consider their deficiency. And I'm looking at them and saying, they're both very attractive. And yet they were seeing all the negatives in them. Does that do you find it's affecting your students, or do they pick up on this and then become more self-conscious?
I think it tends to be reassuring for students, but even for, professors and myself. So, for example, when I, leave a meeting and I'm thinking about some stupid thing I said, I think about all the things I could have said better, all the ways in which I could have been more articulate, all the ways I sort of imagine that other people must be judging me. And in fact, people in the room aren't judging you as harshly as you are judging yourself and as harshly as you think that they are judging you. And so I think it's definitely reassuring to students, but also to, professionals and anyone who kind of has ever left a situation wondering, did I talk too much? Did I ask enough questions? Did I say something stupid? In many of these cases, people just leave an interaction with you thinking, that was a pleasant interaction, or, she made some interesting points. And they're not focused on the kind of nitty-gritty worries that you have.
You've already got me feeling a lot better because I think I'm one of those people. And I think you mentioned before, and it's something we should all take with us, that we focus more on our own insecurities than anybody else does. So if we can just remember that, at least it might reduce our fears or apprehensions a little bit. Dr. Bohn, at this point in the show, I'd like to remind our audience that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Today, our guest is Vanessa Bohns. She is the author of You Have More Influence Than You Think. And Dr. Bohns, can you tell us where we can get the book and if there's a website where we can find out more information?
Sure. The book is available anywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore. And my website is vanessabohns.com. And there are also some more links to places you could purchase the book there.
As always, I'd like to tell our audience, this is a fun read, even if you don't think you're going to use it or you're not a professor in college. If you're just talking to people at a party, knowing these things and being able to tell them and passing it on to your children. Dr. Bohns has done the studies. She's done the experiments. So you have the benefit of all this. And people are going to think you're very smart, just like Dr. Bohns. Now, Dr. Bohns, you mentioned a term in the book, audience tuning. What is that?
So this is the tendency that we all have to tune our language to what we think another person thinks. So, for example, if I just ate dinner at a restaurant I know that you love last night, but I had a really terrible experience there, I probably won't turn to you and say, oh, that restaurant was terrible. I'll probably say, I wasn't too thrilled about this particular thing. But then if I'm talking to somebody else who I know it doesn't really enjoy that restaurant, I might actually say it was so terrible, I couldn't believe it. And so having the same experience and kind of conveying the same information, we do it a little bit differently if we know that someone feels one way about an issue and a little bit differently to someone we know feels another way about an issue.
Now, I'm a fan of sports radio, as most of our listeners know, and at least I've observed, and I want to ask you if this is audience tuning, when the sportscasters are talking about the home team, they'll tell you how passionate a player is, how competitive, what a hard worker. That same action, whatever the player did, if it's by an away player, the opposition, he's dirty, he's a cheater, he's a showboat, he doesn't really care about the team. Is that audience tuning?
That's definitely one of the things that allows for audience tuning. So audience tuning would basically take these concepts where you could frame it either way. You can look at the same quality someone has or the same behavior that someone's engaging in, and you can interpret it in multiple ways. Right? They can have a negative connotation or it can have a positive connotation. And so when I'm talking to one person, I may use the words that make it sound more positive. When I'm talking to someone else, I might use the words that sound more negative. Now, in sports, interestingly, I don't know how much we actually do that because there is a lot of friendly rivalry with sports. And I know for sure, for example, my husband is a big soccer fan of, English football. And if he talks to someone who has a rival team, he definitely doesn't tone down his language and tune in that way. So I think it depends really on the context. And that's kind of a special context where we allow ourselves to kind of do the opposite of tuning and egg people on. But certainly that same property that you could phrase something one way or another allows for this tuning where you can basically say the same thing to someone, but phrase it differently to one person versus another.
Now, I know you talk about people who tailor their message to, of course, their audience. Are there, I would say, professions or maybe celebrities or areas of the media that we see this the most in, or that you use as an example that we would recognize it immediately?
One of my favorite examples in the book is of stand-up comedians, because stand-up comedians really talk about how they get up on, the stage in front of an audience, and they really tune their show to the audience's reactions. So they'll try out bits, and if the audience laughs, okay, they'll keep going with that bit and they'll use it in their next show. If the audience doesn't laugh, they'll cut that bit or they'll change it quite a bit. And so as much as you think about influence as kind of the person in front of the audience holding the microphone, oh, that's the person with all the influence, I love kind of flipping it in the context of stand-up comedy and in so many other contexts as well that this can apply to, because really that person standing there with the microphone is being deeply influenced by the audience, right? The audience's reaction is fundamentally shaping how they do their job in that case, the kind of material that they put out there.
Is that a good thing, a bad thing, or neutral?
I'd say it is a neutral thing because it really depends on how it's used, but it's definitely an empowering thing if you think of how often we're in the audience, that actually when you are in the audience, you have a lot of power. It's not just that person up there in front of the stage who has the power. And another consequence of this is that once someone has tuned their message, and if we go back to sort of non-comedic examples, but maybe, tuning your message to a particular issue to someone that you're talking to, once you've tuned your message and said something in a certain way, there's something called the saying is believing effect. So once I've adjusted my language and talked to you about something in a certain way, because I presume that's what you think about this thing, I start to think that a little bit more myself, right? I might have had a terrible experience at that restaurant, but I phrase it in a more positive way to you. And now I'm kind of rethinking, I guess it wasn't that bad. And so in that way, audiences don't just change the message, but they also change the beliefs of the person who's giving them that message.
This is so fascinating. I find it fascinating and so interesting because saying is believing. Just to get into that and how we can use it on a day-to-day basis. I'm wondering amongst your students and maybe your fellow professionals, professors, etc., are there any professions or areas of education where you find this influence topic most helpful, or does it help young teachers or salesmen or pastors?
It definitely helps me sort of be more aware of how my words are resonating with my students, because I teach a class of 200 students. And when I stand there in front of this big room, all my students, I can tell, think they feel invisible. They think that I can't see them. They're doing all sorts of things that they don't realize that I see them doing. And one of those things is nodding along to certain things I say, or, kind of zoning out when I get to certain parts. And I take that as feedback and I adjust my teaching. And in the end, the audience really does change the way I wind up presenting my material. And that's made me a much better teacher, just having this influence and this feedback from an audience that has no idea that they're actually giving that to me.
Do you feel, and I was a teacher many years ago, and I shared just what you said, but do you feel this is a quality that the best teachers have because they're reading, I'm going to use the expression, reading their audience. And whether it's a third grader or a college student or a high school student, if the student isn't getting it or isn't getting it the way you're presenting it, I guess it's time to change the manner or use an analogy or put on a video or something.
Yeah, I do think that it definitely leads to better teaching, right? Because if you are attuned to that, you improve and you adjust. But at the same time, I think that most teachers or most people who stand in front of a room, whether it's standing in front with a PowerPoint and giving a presentation or whether it's entertaining, we are human. And we are looking for that kind of feedback. We're looking to see that, people look happy. People are having the reaction I'm hoping they're having. And so I think actually most people are attuned to this. And I guess what we do with it and how well we adjust in a direction that we want to sort of take our influence, that is something that can be worked on. But I think a lot of people are super attuned to the feedback that they're getting.
And we're here on a college radio station, so I'm going to take it right out of your book and warn the students here at the college. You mentioned that you have a class of over 200 people, and I know from your book, you pick out people, and you've said in the book, you know things they're doing during class they have no idea you're seeing because you're looking at a group of 200, but individually you're able to pick out a few here and there, and you surprise a few of them afterward by telling them they were either not paying attention or on the cell phone or writing a note or something else. Am I correct?
You are very correct. And I'll say it's most often seeing them, on their computer or on their cell phone. But there have also been some other things that I've caught students doing, which I won't get into,
okay.
Which I'm sure they wish I hadn't seen.
But that's a warning to all college students. The professors see more than you think they are seeing. So if you want to know more about that, get Dr. Bohns' books. You have more influence than you think. At this point in the show, again, I'd like to remind our audience you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Bill Horan. Our guest today is Dr. Vanessa Bohns, spelled Bohns. Her book is You Have More Influence Than You Think. And Dr. Bohns, again, I'd like to ask you where we can get the book and a website where we can find out more.
Sure. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your local bookstore. And my website, www.vanessabohns, again, that's BOHNS.com, also has other places you can get the book.
And you don't have to be a college student or a professor or a research person to appreciate this book. It's written in very simple, fun language, but I think you'll amaze people. It's a great book to talk about at the next cocktail party or just if you want to surprise somebody with your knowledge. And I think you'll get more out of the world, and they will too. Let's put it that way. By the way, I'm just wondering, do any of your students come up to you and say, gee, as a result of this book, I've gotten 5 more dates last month, or I made 3 sales. I'm in a sales business on the side or something. Did any of them find breakthroughs because of this?
I've had a lot of people contact me and say I was participating in this charitable organization. I was soliciting donations for something. That seems to be the most common thing that people pick up on. And they'll say, I really just was dreading it. I really cared about this organization. I really wanted to raise the money, but I was dreading it. And then I read your book or I heard you on a podcast and I felt so much better about it. And it really did go so much better than I expected, just like you said it would.
Were they giving out? Did they do? Is that what they picked up on, or was there any other points, or just a combination of them? Do you know?
I'd say a combination, but definitely the chapter about asking for things and how people are more likely to help you than you think when you ask for things. That has been a particularly sort of resonant chapter for a lot of people.
I think it's fantastic, especially because it's a real world book. It's something that anybody, you don't have to be a CEO, you don't have to be in sales, you don't have to be a teacher or a pastor, but anybody can use, and in different professions, and just to enjoy their day more by passing out a compliment and making someone feel better. And I think that person in the room that makes us all feel better, we think they're especially smart, handsome, wonderful, pretty, beautiful, whatever the proper term would be. But I think they're going to get our vote at the next election, whether it's for CEO or president of the company, whatever. Now, there's another term you use, behavioral contagion. What is that, and how does it work in the world?
That's right. So we started out sort of talking about the ways in which we miss that people are watching us and are attuned to our behaviors, and in fact are kind of wondering what's going on in our minds. If you think about it from the reverse perspective, we look around at the people around us and kind of wonder why they do the things they do and pay attention to the things that they're doing. But other people are doing that to us as well. And when they notice what we're doing and start to wonder why, they start to get closer to doing that thing themselves. And that's behavioral contagion. That's basically one person's behavior sparking a chain of events that leads other people to then engage in that same behavior. And so my colleague, Bob Frank here at Cornell, has some fascinating illustrations of this. And one of them is about solar panels. And so he basically shows that once one person in a neighborhood puts up a solar panel, and you can imagine, neighbors walking by that solar panel, thinking about why they decided to do that, kind of going through that decision themselves. I wonder if, we should do that. All of a sudden, you look at aerial footage of neighborhoods, and once one solar panel goes up, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of other solar panels start popping up, and you get these clusters in the aerial footage of solar panels. And that's an example of behavioral contagion, basically people noticing what someone else did and copying it at the end of the day.
Is that when we hear the term social influencer, and I often wonder, is that someone who just needs a designation? I guess to some extent, we're all a social influencer, even if it's in a negative way, like don't wear a funny hat like that old guy because he looks like an idiot. But at least we do influence somebody. The people who designate themselves, the actors and actresses, in quotes, as social influencers, does that come under that heading? We want to be like the Kardashians or something?
That's right. I actually think that that's a great takeaway or summary of the book, is that we're all influencers more than we realize. We tend to designate those celebrities and those people with all the social media followers as the special type. Those are the influencers. Those are the people who shape other people's behavior. But in fact, we all do it, and we do it more than we think. And one reason we kind of miss the ways in which we do it is that we pay so much attention to those influencers. We think that's what influence looks like, right? That's a person who has influence. And we actually have a lot of influence ourselves, even if it's not at that level.
Now, in another next section of the book, you talk about social situations and non-social situations. And you say people are overconfident in non-social matters, but less social behavior, less in social situations. Can you explain that?
Sure. So one of the reasons that the research I review in the book is so fascinating, I think, is that for many years, people were uncovering this overconfidence bias, that people thought that they were smarter than the average person. They thought they were more moral than other people. They thought they were less biased than other people. And it just seemed to be a consistent effect that people were overconfident and thought they were better than average. And then a lot of recent research came out showing that actually in the social domain, when you're thinking about influence, when you're wondering how much people like you, when you're thinking about how many friends you have, we tend to be underconfident. And so it actually shows a very different pattern when you look at these social contexts than we were seeing for so many years.
And I think you said when we're socially comparing, we compare ourselves to the most social person, most popular person. And of course, they're at the top of the mountain, but it doesn't hurt to be 80% as popular. But we think that we're not popular because we're not like them. So we in our own mind kind of drop ourselves way down.
That's right. So if you ask people if they are more or less influential than the average person, they think of that influencer, right? And they think, oh, I'm way below average. When in fact, that's not true, right? You're actually closer, higher up in the ranking than you might think.
Dr. Bohns, once again, I want our audience to know the book is You Have More Influence Than You Think by our guest, Vanessa, Bohns. And I'll ask you one more time, can you give us the website where we can find out more information?
Sure. It's www.vanessabohns.com.
Dr. Bohns, thanks so much for being with us today and for giving us all the good advice. I'd like our audience to know that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.